Day 3 of the September 96 7-day retreat in Springwater. A couple of questions have come up about my use of the word judgment. You may recall yesterday and in other talks and meetings, it comes up very frequently. One sees something and immediately there's a judgment. One sees a person and immediately there's a judgment. I don't like him. I don't like her. Or her I like. He is to this, she is to that. The observation comes up from people who are sitting. It seems there can be no perception without immediately the mind kicking in, judging. And yesterday I made this statement about what goes on when we say, I'm judging. Isn't it bringing oneself in relationship to what has just been perceived, heard or seen? And that was confusing to one person. What do you mean by bringing myself into relationship? Because I am in relationship, with whatever is perceived or not perceived. We are all in relationship. We cannot help it. That's a fundamental fact of life, that we are related not just to each other, to the trees and ground with grass, sky with clouds and stars, the animals, what you name it. We are related. This whole universe is one of interrelationship. So I need to elaborate more on what I mean, bringing oneself into relationship. I didn't mean it abstractly. It needs to be something very concrete, observable in oneself. Maybe it can be observed well in a group discussion. I don't mean just here, but whenever one gets together with people, somebody says something. Isn't something immediately triggered to comment on it, to bring oneself into the picture, to feel some significance, importance? Or if one has nothing to say, one feels unimportant, inferior, needing to comment, needing to know about what is being said by offering further knowledge about it. It's not said negatively. It's not said judgmentally. We're looking at things as they happen in ourselves and each other. For a while, my husband and I were playing a game where when this happened, somebody had to offer their opinion where it was not necessary, was not asked for. It did not help in the situation. We said, how did you get into the picture? Or how did I get into the picture? I mean, it was a humorous thing, making fun at oneself, even noticing one had brought oneself into the picture once again. And if one examines it lightheartedly, not heavy-handedly, one realizes how much we live on these momentary fixes of feeling good about ourselves if we know something about it. We need to, when we walk together, we almost constantly need to label what we see, even if we walk alone. It's a deeply conditioned habit to bring into relationship that which has been accumulated here as experience, as memory, felt as the me, the I. My point on this, my experience on this. And judgment, this is bad or this is good, is measured against one's particular experiences as one has grown up, as one has been indoctrinated with value, what is good and what is bad. And that channels the perception already. Now another person said, although at that particular time she did not want to go into that in detail, there were other things to be looked at. The way you, Toni, talk about judgment sounds as though there should not be any discrimination, but there needs to be discrimination as a function. I was a little concerned about the word discrimination because now it is very heavily colored with discriminating against people of other creeds and races, other social status. But originally this word did not mean that. That's why I'd rather use the word discerning. This is so and that is so. But words are usable and flexible and very relative. So if we agree on how we use the word discriminate, not meaning judgmental, prejudicial overtones, then we can use it for what? Now, it didn't come up in a particular conversation, but it comes up very frequently that people say of themselves, I judged this because one sees something and sees what it does, one sees injustice being done. One hears about crime being committed, a murder being committed, or ethnic cleansing taking place, the Holocaust in the past. People ask me, how can you be complacent about this? Not judge it. It calls for a judgment. So we say and think. And I'm not talking right now about our social system of so-called justice, which is very questionable because it discriminates very frequently in favor of race. But leaving that aside, I'm not talking about the system of keeping some semblance of order, even though it may be the illusion of order. But faced with the fact of murder taking place, what is our response? That depends on our state of being this moment, doesn't it? Is there freedom from traditional value systems, from whatever we have been brought up under, precepts, commandments, social standards, freedom from this incredibly powerful impulse in human beings for revenge, coupled with anger and hatred of those who murder. So, if there is some freedom from all of this confinement, then how does one respond or see? One may not see it, one may hear about it, see television or read in the paper about it. Murder taking place. What is the response? one needn't go by any idea I shouldn't be judging. Or if I see what it does to human beings, then I'm judging. Can there be clarity about seeing what an action is, what its consequences are, and what it arises out of, to clarify the whole situation, which is our whole human situation? That's not judgment. That's allowing, in the presence of clear looking, clear wondering and inquiring, allowing the situation to speak for itself, or to invite further questioning without drawing conclusions at a certain point quite arbitrarily. Recently, in the latest issue of the Shambhala Sun, I think that was the journal, or was it Tricycle? No, it was the Shambhala Sun. There were 3 articles about people on death row. One man who has, since the appearance of the article, been executed, and another one awaiting execution after 8 years on death row. The other one had been on death row for 12 years, I believe, 12 or 15 years. And in both human beings, a change, a transformation taking place. Struck me particularly was the second article I read about a man who degraded, raped, and murdered several women. And his account of himself in this article, his gratitude for having been fortunate to be given a drug that has almost alleviated, not completely, alleviated a compulsive fantasy about raping women, degrading, raping, killing women. And the way he led into this was by saying, we all know, don't we, when a tune doesn't leave the mind alone, it goes on and on and on, no matter how much one wants to be free of that tune, it hums. People mention this in retreat all the time. It's a very common occurrence. He said, what if this hum is what has gone on in this mind? With the compulsion to act on it. And now, with this drug, he says it's sort of receded way to the back of this mind. It's there, but it is not in control. All he said he was wishing for is reconciliation with the victims and the people it's caused so much sorrow, pain, horror. And, of course, one can imagine, in one of the articles it was described, whether with this person or that person, what people who end up on death row have gone through in their lives to distort this mind. Usually it's in relationship with parents or teachers or combination of that, but it may just be also a chemical dysfunction. See, we are so identified as individual human beings, as the actors, the responsible doers, and therefore point our finger at other people who do things, and they didn't need to do that, and they did it out of free will. This is sort of our feeling. They wanted to do that. They could have done otherwise. We don't think it through enough because we don't know ourselves enough. But if we begin to understand ourselves more clearly due to direct evidence, discovering at a moment what happens. Somebody maybe hurts our feelings. The agony arising, maybe the anger, rage, or desire to pay the person back. Not to forget this, but to get one's just due. This is observable in oneself. It may not be acted upon, but the drama may play out nonetheless in human beings like you and me, who may or very likely not have gone through what some of the people who end up killing others have gone through, psychologically, physically, chemically. So, can one see each other's actions in wonderment? Where are you coming from? What is this coming out of? And wondering about the state of the brain body at the moment of doing something in oneself or in another. Learning about the distorting factors. This is not judging, this is finding out, clarifying, discovering. And with that may come a new sprout of compassion for human beings like you and me and everyone else, who are so susceptible to ideas blocking direct perception, distorting it, making it appear as though someone is against me, or I have to be against him or her. I can't, of course, cover the whole field. There's always a little tiny bit picked out of a whole infinite range of data. So, if one is looking at something more carefully for the second time, is there this automatic judging, or is there now a wondering and discerning or discriminating of what is really taking place, which, as we said yesterday, takes a lot of patience, unhurried looking and listening. Because by quietly listening and looking, this brain begins to slow down and therefore can see things clearer. So, this thing is brought up so often. I can't see anybody in this hall without some judgment about him or her. It's often at the beginning of the retreat. Later on, this may change. And of course, at the end of retreat, when we talk with each other and eat, and have a good time, one realizes most of those images were pure fantasy, have nothing to do with the real person, who turns out to be quite different from what one thought they were. So how are we looking at each other? How are you looking at me, listening to me? You can see in the eyes of a person whether there is sort of an innocent looking at you or whether an image is operating. That is perceivable if oneself is relatively free from imagery at that moment. Maybe completely free from imagery. Then one sees there's a judgment, which means one is being put up or being put down, to make it simple. One can see that in the expression of the eyes. And one can can discover it in oneself. That is the miracle. It doesn't have to continue. This looking through tainted, tinted glasses of idea and prejudice. And yet the first step is not how do I get rid of these glasses, of this imagery, but to perceive it, to be aware of it, without judging it right or wrong, good or bad, but seeing again and again, watching it for the thousandth time, what it does. It keeps us apart, stuck in our own little capsule. It doesn't only keep us apart, it keeps us afraid of each other, afraid of ourselves. It comes up so frequently in people saying, I would like to be more intimately related. That doesn't just mean sexually, but more in touch with people. Yet I'm afraid of people. Does it sound familiar? Wanting to be in touch, and yet afraid of closeness. What does the feeling of isolation depend on? Why do I feel isolated? And out of that feeling of isolation, the urge not to be isolated, to be related. And then out of that urge to be related, the fear of being rejected, which could be damaging to my image, which is already so fragile. Why do we feel isolated in the first place, when in fact, in truth, we are not? And that truth can be come upon by every single human being. The man on death row before he was executed came upon that truth. He was conveying it to others. Even the guards came in to get some advice from him, or calming down when there was a riot. So it doesn't matter how we start out or what is in the middle. Killing and murder, rape. And then waking up to the truth that we are not isolated. We are, well, just saying words isn't enough. And then people tell me, you're dangling carrots in front of me. If you talk about wholeness or so. One person said, don't ever talk again about vastness and wholeness. I wish this mind was more ingenious and drumming up new words. But what I speak out of is not words. They just come to as conveyor pigeons. And what I'm speaking to is also not words or imagery, which make up our personality. So even though what somebody said yesterday, when you talk about the open mind or the closed mind, then immediately what goes on in this mind is, I need the open one, but I have the closed one, good and bad, comparisons with others. The feeling of inferiority because I don't have it. This is what is caused in me, the person said, when you talk about open mind and closed mind. But see, the beauty of this whole thing is I'm not talking to that personality which is conditioned in evaluation and comparison. Maybe these words address something much deeper, beyond all discrimination. This and that, and me and you. Because they come out of that, and in that we are one. There's no division among human beings, or trees and clouds and insects. In that simple presence, which contains all, and yet in some indescribable way is also beyond it. Something comes to mind, what somebody mentioned in a meeting. Person said, it's interesting, this is the first retreat where you say it's all right to read and write in the room, but at least on day one, or whatever the day was that we talked, I decided, or maybe even before coming here, I decided not to keep a journal for once. It seems to be quite a different thing. To live journal-less. Every journal writer could experiment with this sometime. To find out all about journal writing. It's not being condemned. It's not being advocated. Can we find out more about it? Because even if we're not journal keepers, we're all storytellers. And we love to tell our story. People love to hear stories. Usually when in a talk there's some part of a biographical nature where I relate something about my past, inevitably people will later say, there was a good talk today. Why don't you do more of that? Storytelling and picture taking. We all know about picture taking. The pictures of our last vacation trip usually are so much more beautiful than the trip itself was. Because it leaves out all the stuff that pictures taken at a propitious moment don't record. And why is it, one can ask oneself, why is it that we do seem to feel much more at home and stimulated in living in our stories, which of course have lots of illustrations, video, going with it. Maybe some experiences, what one has to live through, may be easier to take if one writes a journal about it and lives in the presentation of what one is living through. Sometimes after I've written a letter, maybe I haven't written a letter in a long time, to my sister, catching up on the news, and reading the article, I think it really sounds terrific. Was it that terrific? So, what is it about this? Putting into words, into form, maybe beautiful form, poetic form, that may seem, I don't say that is, that may seem rather drab or sort of very ordinary, it is sort of lifted onto a different level by the storytelling and picture making. And in that we are habituated to live a good deal, maybe most of the time. People tell me this in retreat because it's so uninteresting just to sit. The brain produces videos, fantasies, which become exciting and stimulating. And maybe it is because we have lived in this stimulation so much that the body is dulled, insensitized to be in touch with what's really here, unadorned by word and style. The fields are poetic, they don't need to be put in words to express that. And can there be a gradual sensitizing of this body by letting go of the journal, as this one person is experimenting with? Of course, I'm just using the journal as a special example. To really not shy away or run away from boredom, but rather question into it. What is this thing, this state of being that words call boredom and then already have judged it as something undesirable, unpleasant? To be gotten rid of. What is it really? Allow it to speak for itself, to reveal itself, to open up in this wondering without moving away. I think in such being with states that present themselves in the retreat, at times really unconditionally, choicelessly being with the fear, one has tried everything, and here it is. So, this unconditional being with what's there, it does sensitize the body. So that often people say, well, during the retreat not much was going on, but coming home or stepping out on the way back, driving through the country, I was incredibly present and colorful. Now, someone thinking, or several people thinking, now she puts out a carrot again for after retreat. It did sound like that, didn't it? It doesn't have to wait till after. All that's needed is step out of the house, onto the deck. The grass, the woods, the meadows. And maybe for split moments at a time, the aliveness of this instant, of no need to be somewhere else. We will end here for today.